Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Kalik, and this is another special live episode of Dispatches. We are now in day 5 of Israel's war on Iran, and it's escalating fast, and it's terrifying. Over 200 killed in Iran, around 24 in Israel, and it was entirely preventable. Israeli warplanes are bombing Iranian hospitals and media offices live on air. Israeli leaders are publicly calling for the assassination of Iran's head of state. And now Donald Trump is demanding a full Iranian surrender, with the likelihood of U.S. direct offensive involvement getting higher by the hour. And Netanyahu's ministers are saying Tehran should burn. This is the same playbook we saw in Gaza and in Lebanon, what they call the Dahia Doctrine, being unleashed now on Iran. And where's the opposition to this madness? Where are the Democrats? Where's Europe? The G7 just blamed Iran for everything. Not a word about Israeli aggression. No condemnation of Netanyahu's death threats. The Western world is either applauding or silently enabling this war. This war couldn't have happened without the last 20 months of genocide in Gaza, we should remember. Israel normalized mass slaughter, the murder of babies, the starvation of civilians. And the so-called international community normalized it too. They taught Israel that it could do anything to anyone and face no consequences. And now the US is being pulled in, not by accident. This was always the plan. Trump lied. He pretended to be anti-war while helping Israel lay the groundwork for this war. And now his people are gloating. And the potential for US to deepen its involvement by bombing Iran's nuclear sites is increasing. This would be a catastrophe for the region and the world. And joining me to talk about all of it is Assal, a political analyst, historian, and non-resident fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. She's been cutting through the propaganda in real time, and I'm thrilled to have her with me today. But before we dive in, just a quick reminder, Dispatches is only possible thanks to you. If you value our work, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/breakthrough news or drop a contribution in the live chat. It helps keep this going. Now I will bring in Assal. Welcome to Dispatches.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me. And I know that there's a ton to talk about here. But before we get into the meat of it, because, I'm sure you saw the latest news just before we went live that Trump has put out the statement demanding total Iranian surrender or else. I just wanted to get your general thoughts about where your head is at right now. This is day 5 of this war. We were talking before we started recording, you have a lot of family in Iran. Trump yesterday, or maybe this morning, whatever time zone you're in, demanded that all Iranians leave Tehran, a city, the greater Tehran area has 17 million people in it. So, how are you doing and what are you thinking?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me and having this conversation. And I'll start by sort of apologizing ahead of time if I'm not as if I seem more absent-minded than normal. I haven't been sleeping as well as I should be, mostly because, as you said, I have family in Iran. And, where the situation is, so for instance, I have family in Tehran, and you have the president of the United States saying that 10 million people should evacuate the city. That's just the sitting population in Tehran. If you look at the greater metropolitan area and the commuting population that comes in and out, you're looking at 14, 15, 16 million people. So there's a logistic problem for that happening. Gas stations are out of gas. Remember that Israel is also attacking Iran's civilian infrastructure, its energy infrastructure, which when Russia does, we call a war crime, but when Israel does, nobody says anything. So people who are trying to get out, the roads are clogged. I have a friend who is an Iranian American who's visiting family in Iran, now stuck. There's no US embassy, so it's not as easy to get Americans out. You can call the Swiss embassy, but then they have to deal with this moment of, well, if I try to get out of the situation, I have to say goodbye to my family who can't leave. And how do you do that? So there's a lot, you have people this is a massive metropolitan city. Imagine you have to evacuate hospitals, people who are getting treatment for all sorts of different ailments and diseases every day. The elderly, it's just, the scale of what is being asked is essentially impossible. And then it also begs the question of, well, why do you, if precision strikes are being carried out on nuclear facilities. Why does the entire capital city need to be evacuated and depopulated? Like, what are they coming back to? That sounds more like you're carpet bombing the entire place. So there's all of these sort of thoughts of where we're at. But something that I think is so important to talk about is this is on the heels of the daily devastation that we have seen in Gaza for 20 straight months, and the wars that we have seen in Lebanon that Israel started last year, and its continued occupation and bombings in places like Syria or Yemen. So it's not, this has to be understood within that larger context. I think it's impossible to separate them, and it's also impossible, I think, in certain ways, to separate our emotions. What I don't want to do is, as much as obviously there's the extra layer of challenge because it is my own family, and I have to directly try to ask, are they okay? Where are they going? Coordinate. It doesn't in any way minimize the devastation that already exists and what I have personally felt in watching the genocide in Gaza unfold.
I can't even imagine, Assal, what you're dealing with right now. But in many ways, I kind of can, because, I had to do it over Lebanon. And that's the thing, is this has been going on for 20 months with our friends and colleagues, and Gaza and Palestinians we know in the US and around the world who've been dealing with watching Israel commit crime after crime against people there. And then, I was stuck outside of Lebanon during the big escalation for part of it, at least last year. And it was so hard to watch from abroad. I was just not sleeping. I know exactly what you're talking about, constantly worried about my family, watching every single bomb and where it dropped and what time, and just terrified of what would come next. So, I hate that I can relate to you on this. And I'm so sorry for what you must be dealing with right now, because I know it's sick also watching this. This is how I felt with Lebanon, is, you know what's coming. If it continues to escalate, you know what's coming. You know the kind of violence and the tactics Israel's going to unleash. They're already, giving us a taste of it now and promising worse. And, before we kind of get into how we got here, I wanted to kind of reference some of the outrageous things that we've seen just in the last few days since this started. And one of those things, is the fact that Trump at this point, same person, Netanyahu, called for murdering the head of Iran. I want to just quickly play the clip of this, because it's just so insane. This is being said in real time on national television stations. So here's what Netanyahu said about that.
The president flatly rejected a plan, an opportunity that the Israelis had to take out the supreme leader. Do you understand his concern? My understanding is his concern is that this would escalate the conflict beyond where it is already.
It's not going to escalate the conflict. It's going to end the conflict. We've had half a century of conflict spread by this regime that terrorizes everyone in the Middle East, has bombed the Aramco oil fields in Saudi Arabia, is spreading terrorism and subversion and sabotage everywhere. That's the forever war is what Iran wants. And they're bringing us to the brink of nuclear war. In fact, what Israel is doing is preventing this, bringing an end to this aggression.
So I'm sorry to trigger you with that, but I want to go ahead and get your reaction to that statement.
I mean, it's indicative of the general rhetoric that you've heard from like Israeli official accounts for the last week or so, and the level of gaslighting is just mind blowing. Like you see posts about Iran is targeting civilians and Israel is targeting military sites. Well, first of all, the idea that the state of Israel is talking about targeting civilians as a war crime is unbelievable to listen to, as they are carrying out a genocide. Every single day, Palestinians are being slaughtered by the dozens who are trying to get food. Every single day this is happening. Israel is doing this every day. How is that not targeting? You're literally taking guns, shooting at civilians you are starving, who are trying to get food in your, quote, aid program, which is really just a death trap. So to hear that, there's that aspect of it, right? Everything that they say, oh, it's a war crime apparently to target buildings with people living in them, residences. Gaza has been flattened. So there's that aspect of it. And then there's the context in Iran itself. I mean, if you look at the death toll currently, it's Iran's death toll, and there's varying numbers on this, but the official death tolls, at least on the Iranian side, it's 10 times higher. The asymmetry of that itself tells you who is targeting what. You can't, but it's this backwards logic that essentially says if an Israeli civilian dies, because that life matters, that counts as some kind of crime. But if an Iranian civilian dies, that's collateral damage. If a Palestinian civilian dies, that's collateral damage. If a Lebanese civilian dies, that's collateral damage. Or worse, they're human shields. They're human shields. But where is Israel's military infrastructure? Why is it being built in the middle of Tel Aviv? Isn't that the same thing as using human shields? Just the constant hypocrisy and backwardsness of the way that the information is presented. Israel attacked Iran. I mean, this is absurd on its face to talk about. But if I have to mention something as a historical context to this, because there's a sort of irony of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. In 1980, when Iraq invaded Iran, Iraq was the aggressor. Iraq invaded Iran. That's just a very basic fact. This is in 1980. The international community's response to that was basically to take the side of the aggressor. Iran was completely isolated internationally, and so international law didn't apply to them. They didn't have the same kind of protections and sovereignty. Iranian officials have used that very war to argue for why they need certain military postures or military assets. Why do they need air defenses? Because when they were invaded in the 80s, nobody came to their aid. The international community didn't stop the state of Iraq. The international community, for the most part, including the United States, in fact, supported Saddam Hussein, which is, of course, the person the United States invaded Iraq in 2003 to take out because he was such a horrible person. They cited things that Saddam Hussein did during the Iran-Iraq war that they supported him in as a basis to invade Iraq in 2003. I mean, the circular logic is insane when you start to even a little bit unpack it. But this is the argument that has been repeatedly made by Iranian officials. What is happening now? The exact same thing. Israel attacks Iran, and what is the reaction of European states? They condemn Iran for what would be called, if it was the other way around, self-defense. How can self-defense only apply to one state? How can it be a right if it's exclusively that of one entity and no one else? One people have the right to self-defense and no other people in the region have a right to self-defense. This is what they want you to believe is civilized. This is how the civilized world operates. And everybody else is barbaric, but not the people committing genocide. They're the civilized ones. This is the kind of rhetoric that you hear over and over and over again. And it's a massive propaganda machine that is supported by the media.
It's so insane. I just very quickly, before I show you a video, to speak to what you were talking about with the Europeans. This is Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Union. Also, her ancestors were plantation owners. I just want to throw that out there, which makes sense. It's very fitting. She writes, just spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu. We're following developments in the Middle East with deep concern. I reiterated our commitment to peace, stability, and diplomatic efforts leading to de-escalation. In this context, I underlined that Israel has the right to defend itself. Iran is the main source of regional instability. And it's important to note that, Germany was also arming Iraq during that Iran-Iraq war that you mentioned. And the reason they were supporting Iraq in that war is because Iran had had a revolution. And you can say about that what you will, but that revolution took Iran out of the hands of a dictator that was backed by the West and that was actually put in place by the West in the 1950s when the Western countries overthrew Iran's democratically elected leadership to try to take Iran's oil. So, I mean, you're just talking about decades and decades and decades of coming after Iran in just the most reprehensible ways. And we're witnessing a kind of culmination of that here. But, I wanted to show you another video because I think this speaks to what everyone's so concerned about now. And we can get a little bit more into that as well. But, Donald Trump, just before we were recording, I mentioned that he issued a statement, I think it was on social media, calling for Iran's unconditional surrender. And then he also cited the possibility of killing Iran's supreme leader and referred to Israel's war efforts with the words "we." And we all know that we're waiting on to see what Donald Trump decides to do, but this would suggest that the U.S. could, I don't want to say enter the war against Iran because they're already a part of it, but more deeply enter it. And we know that that would mean that the U.S. bombing Iran's nuclear sites, which the Israelis can't do. And we'll get to that, but this is a part of it. There's also an insane entitlement coming from the Israelis. I'm going to show you a video of Yoav Gallant, Israel's former defense minister. I'll remind people that this man in the beginning of the genocide in Gaza is the one who referred to Palestinians as human animals before calling for the total starvation, siege of everything in Gaza that, has gotten even worse today. So here he is, I think it's on CNN, talking about what he thinks the U.S. should do.
I believe that the United States of America and the President of the United States have an obligation to make sure that the region is going to a positive way and that the world is free from Iran that possess nuclear weapon in the middle of the richest place in oil and gas in the world. This could be a disaster for the world. And I believe that the determination of the American president that have been shown recently will pave the way to America to enter into this very important operation. The president of the United States have the option to change the Middle East and influence the war and influence the world, not only the war, in order to do something that will create a better future for all of us.
So there you have former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant saying that the U.S. is obligated to help Israel in this regime change war. Assal, what's your reaction to that?
There's so much. Okay, there's so much to unpack. First of all, let's go back for a minute. We're going to talk about the war criminal you just put on. What you talked about when it came to a coup in 1953, the selective application of international law to our friends and foes. That is all, there's a name for all of this. It's called imperialism. It's like a very basic concept. And we live with this idea that we live in a post-colonial, post-imperial world because, we created a whole international rules-based order. And now we have sovereignty and rules for things, but we don't because they're selectively applied by those who are in power. And therefore it's an extension of imperialism. Now you see, when we talk about, I don't like using the phrase mask off moment anymore because it's become so, ridiculous to say. Like we get it now, but the language of total surrender, that's imperialism. What is that? Total surrender of what? A legal thing they're allowed to do according to international law? The ideas, because things get repeated so much in Western propaganda, you just think well, this makes sense. But then if you just take 1 second to think about it, would it make sense in reverse? Would it make sense for any entity just because it has power to come and tell another state, you have to do this? No, of course not. And there has to be also a separation between the idea that, people will criticize the Islamic Republic for many, 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 many good reasons. Nonetheless, Iran is not just a government. It is a country of 90 million people. It is borders that are sovereign. And those have something to do with international law. And it's not just about Iran. It's not just about Lebanon. It's not just about Palestinians. Those things are extremely important, but it is about a system that is meant to protect 8 billion people on the planet. And that system, hasn't worked very well generally, but now has been completely wiped out. Why did that system come into existence? Because of World War I and World War II, which caused unbelievable devastation on a global scale, killing tens of millions of people at those times with much lower populations. Those are massive proportions of the population of the globe at the time. So there's so many implications to the fact that we've completely let go of that. And you have, again, these gaslighting war criminals coming on talking about why is the US obligated to do anything for Israel? It is as if Israel is the one giving the US billions of dollars in aid every year. It's as if Israel is the one protecting the US. And it's not that way. It is the other way around. And there's a reason. It's really interesting when you look at Trump himself. He played on this idea. I mean, he was in Saudi Arabia just a few weeks ago, I think, maybe a month ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, talking about in this sort of grand speech about the scourge of US interventionism and how that's bad. And we don't want US interventionism anymore, because he understood that those interventionist wars did nothing for US interest, killed many, many innocent people, and did nothing to stabilize the region. So when you listen to someone like Gallant say, oh, he can change the Middle East for the better, when has that worked out? They've said, you know what Netanyahu said in 2002, leading up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003? He guaranteed that if you take out Saddam, it'll have positive reverberations throughout the region. Where are the positive reverberations? So it's this thing that gets repeated over and over. If you do what we want, everything will be better. But what's never addressed is, what if you actually address the root cause of what the problem with Israel is? The occupation of Palestinians and Palestinian land. That's why they have to start wars. That's why they have to do, not only is Israel expansionist, obviously, and if you look at, Israeli nationalists that will share posts about like the map of Greater Israel. Yeah, that's a big map. That goes into many countries in the region. So there's an expansionist mentality, especially of the current administration and government that is in Israel, led by Netanyahu. But there is also the idea of distracting everyone from the fact that Israel is committing genocide right now. Right now, as we are talking, Palestinians are being slaughtered in Gaza. You have de facto annexing of the West Bank. You have ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. I mean, it's unbelievable that this is now being used as a distraction in order for them to continue that. And on the US side, there's no popular support whatsoever. And this is not, I'm not talking about amongst, liberals and Democrats and leftists. I am talking about MAGA, like the very base of Trump supporters who have come out. I mean, it's when you have to look at someone like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and say, my God, they make sense. What's happening? So it really begs the question of, how can a US administration be so beholden to a foreign state that the president is not only willing to renege on his own promises, but also renege on his promises to his own base, like something that was very, very specific to what they wanted. This is the furthest thing from America first. This is Israel first.
Yeah, just because, since you brought that up, I have this clip that I thought was interesting. It's Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, who are opposed to what's happening right now. And there's like a MAGA kind of situation and chaos. I mean, my personal take on this is that Trump was full of shit the entire time. Miriam Edelson gave him like $100 million. Trump has no principles. He doesn't care about anything but, power. And if somebody gives you $100 million, you're going to do what they want. And Miriam Adelson, the wife of the late Sheldon Adelson, is a psychotic hawk who wants, to destroy Iran, to make the region belong to Israel. And of course, the US is on like a war path too, because they want hegemony over the entire region, and Israel is their tool to do that. But anyway, since you mentioned MAGA and chaos, here's Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson.
It's a decapitation of total leadership. So this is a total regime change, which, by the way, you may have a plan for regime change, is fine, but you got to bring the American people along. Let me go back.
By the way, I said that publicly last week. This is the point of this is regime change. I know everyone involved. I know I'm telling the truth. I have no weird motive here at all. I don't hate Israel. I'm not.
Plus, you know the players, and you went to, and you know the Iraq situation.
This isn't a regime change effort, and why not just say that? But you're a Holocaust denier for saying that. Well, stop. Let's have a rational conversation about what our aims are here. And maybe you can convince me that we need to support a regime change war in Iran. Tell me how that plays out in a country of 90 million people. Have you thought it through? Do you even care? And the answer is no. We have a economic and political and demographic crisis in Europe because of U.S.-backed, Israel-backed
Syria
wars in the Middle East.
Yeah.
That's what's destroying.
So, you got that little white nationalist bit at the end there, but at least they recognize that the refugees and immigrants they hate so much are largely in the global north because their countries have been destroyed by American imperialism. So, I'll give him that. But the point is that you've got MAGA and chaos. So it's like Trump has basically decided that between the sort of neocon end timer hawks versus those guys who, again, they want to use the U.S. military to like put down protests in America, but they certainly don't want to use the U.S. military against Iran, which is a contradiction in and of itself. It seems like the neocons and end timers are winning. I mean, Mike Huckabee, we just saw Trump put up like a letter Mike Huckabee wrote him, and Mike Huckabee is a Christian end timer who is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And in that letter, he basically says that like God put Trump on this earth and helped him survive the assassination attempt last year in Pennsylvania, so he could be here during this moment. And he added that that no president in his lifetime has been in a position like Trump's, not since Truman in 1945. And that is a reference to U.S. President Harry Truman's decision to drop an atomic bomb on Japan during World War II. So yeah, I'm just curious your thoughts on all that.
It's horrible. I don't know, I mean, it's terrifying because that would potentially explain why you need to evacuate 10 million people. I mean, what is it that's what I'm saying is, what is it that's happening that you need to evacuate every single person from this massive metropolitan city? What I will say about Trump, and that's, I mean, I respect your take on it. I think my personal view of him is that he changes his mind. I don't think he doesn't have an ideological perspective. He has one that I think is created in the room that he's standing in with whoever is there. He's very much someone who plays on, whatever is happening in that moment. I mean, in a way, he's a businessman and also an entertainer. So that combination, I think, makes him fickle in his political views to some extent. Obviously not entirely, but he makes contradictory statements all the time. On Iran, he has made contradictory statements. On other things, he has made contradictory statements. So I think I don't know if I would say that this was sort of where we would inevitably end up because this is what Trump was going to do all along. Or, if this is where we end up for a series of other reasons. A lot of, pressure coming from Israel and having his ear and being able to influence it. And we'll have to see what happens and what, how far Trump is actually willing to go in a quote war with Iran. Like, are we talking boots on the ground? Because that's an entirely different thing than we're just going to, decimate you with air assaults and then leave. That's quite different. But then the problem with that calculation, if that is his calculation, is it's not taking into account an Iranian response that then could potentially create more escalation because now the US will say, well, they responded to us, so now we have to, and then this is the unpredictable nature of war in general, mixed with an unpredictable person who's really at the helm of all of it. Because whether or not people like it, whether you like it or not, the single person with the most power to influence the situation is Donald Trump. That's just a fact. And so this idea that he's pressured by Israel is a little bit odd too, because Israel doesn't have leverage. It's the US that has leverage. That's something that we criticized about the Biden administration. And in some ways, I'm actually surprised to see someone like Trump, who's so critical of the weakness of state leaders and the weakness of his predecessor, to essentially acquiesce to Israeli demands in the exact same fashion that Joe Biden did.
I want to talk a bit about some of the lies that we're hearing. I want to unpack some of those lies because one thing we keep hearing over and over again that the Israelis are pushing in all of their media hits on CNN, they're always on CNN, is in all of their statements they're putting out to the public, and that what Trump is repeating and people in his administration are repeating, and actually even people from the Biden administration are going on TV and repeating, is that Iran was about to get a nuclear weapon. This is all to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but it's also kind of a regime change war. But I want to talk about the nuclear lies because you mentioned it before. Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel has also threatened to use its nuclear weapons. And you mentioned all of the crimes Israel's been engaged in. Meanwhile, Israeli officials keep saying that the Iranians are going to get a bomb. It's an existential threat, not just to Israel, not just to the region, but to the entire world. right? So I want you to talk a bit about that. What's the deal with the idea of a nuclear bomb? Because Iran does have this nuclear program, which they actually have a right to have. And they don't have a bomb. And in fact, the supreme leader they want to kill so badly put out a fatwa saying they can't have a bomb. But I'm going to let you take it from there. Can you kind of unpack these lies about nuclear weapons?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that we've literally lived through this already. Like, it's shocking how little they're even trying to change the discourse. They're not even trying to hide it. It's like, well, we have to get the weapons of mass destruction. It's like, where have I heard this before? I feel like I've heard this before. And it's the Iraq playbook essentially all over again. This is precise. And now we know it as a fact, right? There's always this idea that there's confusion at the time. There wasn't confusion at the time. People were saying it at the time. These are lies. There's no WMDs in Iraq, and this is an excuse to invade Iraq and to carry out a regime change campaign, which obviously ended up the way that it did. Decades later, it is almost like unanimous. I mean, it's a consensus, I should say, that it was a wild blunder, right? It's one of the biggest foreign policy blunders of the United States in this century. This is understood even amongst people who supported it. Many of which have come to regret supporting it for that exact reason. And yet here we are again with, interestingly, a more formidable adversary in Iran than you had with Iraq for a number of reasons, starting just with the size of the country and its population. I mean, you're not dealing in the same situation at all. So the fact that we have all of that history and we already know as now historical fact and record that the US fabricated a story in order to carry out an illegal war in Iraq, we're watching it play out again. So how does that work? Okay. Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. People probably heard NPT. Iran is a signatory. And as a signatory, you don't have nuclear weapons, you agree to no nuclear weapons, but you can have a civilian nuclear program because nuclear energy and nuclear research has other applications. It even has applications, which I am no expert in, but in medicine and science and other ways. Obviously, it has an energy component to it. This is why they are allowed to have, under international law, a civilian nuclear program, but not nuclear weapons. As you said, on the Iranian side, there is, let's forget the officials, forget what Iranian officials say. US intelligence says that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapons program. This is US intelligence. Iran allows international inspections. You know who doesn't allow international inspections of their nuclear program and is not a signatory to the NPT? Israel. You know who doesn't have nuclear weapons? Iran. You know who does have nuclear weapons? Israel. You know who won't recognize or acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons? The US. The US does not acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons because it would go against US domestic law. So that's the situation. Israel actually has nuclear weapons. Iran has no nuclear weapons, but somehow Iran is the nuclear threat. Israel is attacking Iran right now. Israel started a war, but again, Iran is the threat. The non-nuclear state is the threat. Israel is carrying out a genocide, but that's not even something we talk about or call it as such. So why be concerned that a genocidal ethno-nationalist state has nuclear weapons? I guess no reason. I mean, it's mind-blowing when you actually know the details. The problem is that the general public doesn't. There was a Brookings poll done back in, I would love to see an updated poll, but this is back in like 2021, where it showed a majority of Americans falsely believed that Iran does possess, or I should say more Americans believed that Iran possesses nuclear weapons, which it does not, then knew that Israel does have nuclear weapons, which it does. How do you end up with that statistic? How do you end up with a statistic in the American public that is completely afactual? Because of the information that they're getting, because of the way that this information is presented, because Iran's nuclear program is always presented as a threat. Israel's nuclear program is never even talked about, and they're just allowed to have it, despite anything that they do. So playing up this idea, Iran was about to have a weapon. Iran was negotiating with the United. On Sunday, they were supposed to have their 6th round of talks. Because the last thing I'll say about this, in order to understand just how absurdly fabricated this kind of threat assessment is back in 2014, when the US and Iran and European states were negotiating the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, basically, these same hawks, these same people right now that are telling you Iran is on the, they were about to have a nuclear weapon, told you then that Iran will never negotiate with the United States. Well, that wasn't true because they did. Then they told you, well, they'll never come to an agreement, but they did. And then they told you, well, they'll never abide by the agreement. You can't trust them. But guess what? They did. And that's, again, historical record. Forget the IAEA reports. Forget that. The Trump administration, Trump 1.0, certified the deal. Remember, he comes in January 2017. The US doesn't leave the deal until May 2018. So for that period of time when the US is in the deal, they had to certify it. And when Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State, the US did certify it. And that means that they concluded that Iran was abiding by the deal. So none of this idea that Iran is just off on this quest for a weapon makes sense when you actually look at the historical record. And if you want to talk about threats, Netanyahu said in 1993 that Iran would have a nuclear weapon in 1999. So here we are.
He also said it like I was watching Jon Stewart did something like on his show that came out today, and he does this he keeps showing these clips of Netanyahu over the last 20 years, literally saying the same exact thing with some cartoon chart. Iran is months away from a nuclear weapon. Iran is months away, over and over and over again. So it's we have it on video. We've got the receipts. It actually is an insult to our intelligence that they don't even come up with better lies.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's cartoonish, right? Because if you actually just put those clips next to each other, you'll watch him age, saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, someone should do that. If you heard it here, go make a compilation of Netanyahu and really emphasize how much he's aged. Real quick, I do want to remind those who are watching to make sure you hit the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. But okay, so something else I want to ask you about, Assal, is, and this is another lie that keeps being put forward, even by people who are kind of smart. So not even people not even people who are just purely pro-Israel propagandists. They are a little bit, but not to such an extreme coup degree. I saw Ian Bremmer making this point too, and Ian Bremmer says stupid things online all the time, but he should know better than this. And that is this absurd delusion that the Iranian people somehow are supporting what Israel's doing because they hate their regime so much, as if you can bomb a country into loving you, as if they're gonna cheer for the state that just burned down. I think I saw yesterday a horse stable was bombed. Children are being killed. We saw yesterday one of the most, I think, shocking images to come out was watching this woman reporting live on air on Iranian state TV, and then they bombed it. And so she was bombed live on air. I mean, it's just completely insane that you think that people in a country like this, even if people don't like their government, you think they're going to turn against the government and support Israel. And so I'm just curious if you can tell us, is that what you're hearing is happening? Are people in Iran just jumping on the pro-Israel bandwagon to get rid of their government as they're being bombed?
The Iranian domestic situation is very complex, as it would be in any country, especially a country of 90 million people. I mean, I think the first clue of whether or not somebody is presenting, they're presenting facts versus they're presenting their own opinion is when they only present one. If I was to give you, well, this is how Iranian people feel, that statement on its face is absurd. Iranian people do not feel the same way. Iranian people in the diaspora don't feel the same way. We're a much smaller population. You can't get 5 people in a room that might feel the same way about something. You think 90 million people feel the same? Of course they don't. So what you'll see is this sort of, you can see all different things. There are people, ordinary people, chanting death to Israel. I have like I said, I have friends who are there who will send videos of they're not participating in it, but they're just on a rooftop seeing the missiles that are being fired into Iran and Iran's defense system like activating. That's why they're recording it, and you can hear it in the background. So these are people saying it. So I can show you that and say, look, everyone in Iran is against what Israel is doing. And that wouldn't be entirely accurate either, because yes, there are people who are so dissatisfied, so angry with their own government that, and because they have not seen that, rightfully so in many cases, that government has the capacity for actual reform and change, and so they don't see an alternative. For them, it's their situation is bad, and they think, well, they're never going to change, so someone come do this for us. Someone come take them out. Does that sentiment exist? Absolutely. Is that a majority opinion? I have seen there's no evidence to say that is the case, right? Like, you have to base this on some kind of actual evidence that you're bringing together, some kind of data points that you're bringing together to say, on this, they all agree. You could make a fairly reasonable argument that the majority of the country is against the state. You could say that. That doesn't mean the same thing, though, and that's the problem. It's conflating anger with the government and the state with being happy that you're being bombed by a foreign country. That doesn't compute for a lot of people. And in fact, one of the sentiments that I have seen, at least, to be the most prevalent, and that's anecdotal. I will say this, I don't have data. So anecdotally, I can tell you the most prevalent opinion that I have seen is, I am not with the Islamic Republic, but I do not support Israel bombing our country, killing our children, destroying our infrastructure. This is not the way. So yes, everything across the spectrum. The other part of the spectrum that nobody ever wants to talk about is the people who support the government, which are a minority, but exist. They're there as well. So there's a ton of things, sort of in between, gradations and nuance of how people feel about things. But that tends to be the dominant opinion. And if you know Iranian history and you know the sort of nationalist sentiments and proclivities of that population, it is a very natural response. For Iranians, the territorial integrity of that map is very important to them across the board. This is, now, again, are there people who don't agree with that? Sure, but it is a fairly dominant opinion. And if the territorial integrity of Iran is challenged, they will take issue with that, because it becomes not an issue of protecting the government, but an issue of protecting the homeland. And that is very much a sentiment that threads throughout that society. It's part of the fabric of that society. And that's why external forces attacking them is sort of it can have the exact opposite effect. Rather than galvanizing people against the state, it can actually have a rallying around the flag effect. At this point, it's far too early to sort of decide which direction that is going to go in. But like I said, I would say anecdotally, and based on other sort of data points, that no, they're not for the bombing of their country. This should not be that hard to understand. Like, Americans have been protesting a lot, haven't they? But if Iran started bombing America to say, we're going to save you from Donald Trump, would Americans suddenly be like, thank you? Probably not. That's just not. I mean, look at how many Israelis protest Netanyahu and their far-right government. Does that mean that if Iran starts bombing Israel to save them from Netanyahu, they're going to be happy? Like, it's just, it's ignoring so much of the reality that's on the ground and selecting a part of it that serves a very specific narrative. Now, what will happen in Iran? I have no idea. I will not pretend to know, but I would be weary of those who do pretend to know.
So I want to walk this through, because it's there's apparently, I'm following developments. The New York Times is saying that there was a closed door Senate hearing with CIA Director John Ratcliffe and the Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee leaders. And they're talking about whether Israel had started a conflict with Iran that it's not able to complete without U.S. help. And there's like a disagreement taking place about whether or not Israel can finish the job on Iran's nuclear sites without the U.S. And so there's I mean, you know this, but I'm telling our audience this, they might not. one of Iran's main nuclear sites called Fordo. You might be hearing that. I think that name is going to become famous in the U.S. media, because it's all I've heard talked about for the last 36 hours is Fordo. Fordo, can Israel bomb Fordo without U.S. help? So the situation here is that this is located deep inside of a mountain. And Israel does not have the bombs that it would need, nor can it carry the bombs that are necessary, if it did have them, to bomb this facility. So Israel wants, and some people in the US government want, the United States to use its 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb, which can only be carried with the B-2 stealth bomber that the US has, to basically drop on that facility to destroy it. And that is what's being discussed right now inside of the US government at the top echelons, is whether the US should do that or not. So let's walk this through. The US decides to do this. What does that mean?
Well, there's so much I wanted to actually comment on because of what you presented, because it's
Please,
feel
free.
I mean, the idea that you would destroy Iran's, you can set it back, sure, but destroying knowledge is much more difficult. And they've tried to do that because they assassinate scientists, which is of course a war crime, but why talk about that? Israel boasts about assassinating scientists in their homes. These are professors. It's like a physicist professor of a university in their apartment, and they bomb them and assassinate them, killing their family with them. And it's like, look what we did. It's insane. It's insane when you think about it. But it's also insane if you think about the fact that essentially what they're saying is you're not allowed to have this knowledge. You can't have it. Only we can have the knowledge, because we're responsible people. We're the good guys that commit genocide or support genocide. I mean, so much is wrong with all of it. Now, personally, I'm against everybody having nuclear weapons, because the whole existential threat to our entire species makes me weary of the idea of wanting to have nuclear weapons. So I wouldn't personally be an advocate of a state like Iran having nuclear weapons, or any state for that matter. The irony is, had the United States stayed in the JCPOA, we wouldn't be in the current situation. Now, who sabotaged that deal? Who didn't like it? Israel. Something that was endorsed by the United Nations, the international community, was basically overwhelmingly supported. But Israel didn't like it, because Israel didn't want detente between the US and Iran. They just didn't. Iran has to be an enemy for Israel. And they have to be an enemy. They have to pose an existential threat, because if that is the dynamic, then when Israel is committing genocide and the Biden admin is being questioned about, are you violating US law by giving weapons to Israel when they're committing genocide? The response of the Biden administration is, well, Israel has other enemies. Israel has other things that they have to deal with. So we're not giving them these weapons to kill Palestinians. We're giving them these weapons to defend themselves. They just happen to be using them to kill Palestinians as well. So it's that kind of thinking. Like, if you really cared, if your concern was genuinely Iran having a nuclear weapon, the best way of preventing it was negotiating with Iran and having Iran agree to the fact that they don't want one. Iran has had the ability to weaponize their program. It's a choice. It was a political choice not to. And the worst part about what is happening right now is that I think the historical record will show that if Iran does choose to weaponize, it's because of Israel's actions. Israel is almost forcing their hand. The public opinion in Iran about whether or not they should have nuclear weapons has shifted dramatically from a decade ago until now. The JCPOA in 2015 was wildly popular. You can just Google Iranians celebrate 2015, and you'll see video after video of Iranians in the streets celebrating the JCPOA, because they were happy that the hope of sanctions being lifted, having better relations with the US, they didn't want a nuclear weapons program. Now you have people who are saying, well, if we had a nuclear weapon, they wouldn't be attacking us. So they're using the opposite logic, and the idea that the US would go in and, okay, you use a bunker buster and you destroy these sites, they'll just go deeper underground and rebuild them. It's this continuous game where the only tool you're using is violence and aggression. Your only tool is force, when in fact diplomacy exists. And Trump attempted diplomacy, but it was extremely inconsistent because he constantly got influenced by Israel. You had Steve Witkoff saying Iran can enrich at 3.67%, which is low-grade uranium, right? That means you cannot weaponize it. Iran hawks and Israel supporters freaked out and said, no, it has to be zero enrichment. So the Trump administration went back and forth. And you saw this happen repeatedly. So if there was actually space for real diplomacy, yes, there is another solution to this problem. But what Israel has done, and if the US goes in and sort of joins the fray, that doesn't eliminate Iran's nuclear program. It incentivizes them to have a weapons program.
I mean, some could argue that it's already been incentivized because, like, maybe these actors, I've seen this argument be made, is like maybe these actors would have thought twice if Iran already had a bomb. But on top of that, I mean, if the US does do this, because so far Iran's leverage, it has a few options, right? Right now it's just limiting its strikes to Israel with this like tit for tat, where Israel, of course, has more weapons, but Iran has managed to do a bit of damage. And make life very difficult, more than Israelis are used to, at least in the last 4 or 5 days. But it's been limited to just Israel. And of course, if the US were to get directly, the US, I need to figure out the right framing for this because the US already is directly involved. But if the US were to start bombing Iran to help Israel, in this case, you would see a situation potentially where Iran would respond by hitting US assets in the region. Which are U.S. bases across the Gulf states, for example, U.S. bases in Iraq. And that, it's like you can't predict where it's going to go. Like, this is such a catastrophe because it doesn't become controllable anymore. It becomes something where the ricochet effects could lead to who knows what. And then also, there's also the issue of, I mean, is it safe to be bombing nuclear facilities? Like, that seems, look, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert, but that seems to me like that could be incredibly problematic for like human beings in general.
Mm-hmm. Because of contamination, of course. And there's already the IAEA saying that there's already like the potential for contamination at Natanz. So yeah, of course it's dangerous to bomb nuclear facilities. I mean, I think you're bringing up a really important point, and I'm going to go back to something that Netanyahu said in one of the clips, the Aramco attacks in 2019. Now, I said that one of the very few states in the entire world that was against the Iran nuclear deal was Israel. At the time in 2015, the other one was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was not happy about the nuclear deal because Saudi Arabia and Iran did not have good relations at the time. They had severed diplomatic ties. And throughout this period of severed diplomatic ties, obviously you've seen sort of attacks that are carried out in a state like Saudi Arabia or UAE. Now, you made the point that Iran has not tried to do anything like that. And there's a reason for that, because 2 years ago, Israel and Saudi Arabia, Iran and Saudi Arabia came to an agreement that they resumed their diplomatic ties. And you've seen this like sort of normalization with other Gulf Arab states. And this makes the situation quite different, because what's happened over the last 10 years, especially, is most of these states are they don't want conflict in the region, and neither does Iran. I mean, if you really look at Iran's reactions to attacks on them, which has happened repeatedly, the responses have been measured. I mean, you're seeing this massive response now because they've been massively attacked. But to your point, that's what makes it measured, because they're only going after Israel with the idea that they don't want to sour the relations they've created with, with their neighbors in the region, essentially. That would be self-destructive in many ways. Now, does that mean that they would never do that? Well, if it comes down to the survival of the state for those people, I'm talking about these individual people, they're not, I mean, if their option is what? Like, if they look at, say, what happened in Iraq, what's their option? What option are they being given? If there's no option given, then they're basically fighting for their own survival. And what happens with anybody when they're fighting for their own survival? They'll they might take things down with them. That's when the potential for things start to get more dangerous. The potential is completely unforeseeable and unpredictable. I mean, you could take it really far. And I'm not saying that these are the things that would happen, but I mean, theoretically, you could have a war of attrition that goes on for a long time. You could have Iran attacking oil facilities and refineries in the region, disrupting shipping lanes, not only in the Red Sea, but also in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. This is where all of the world's energy is coming, well, not all, but like a significant amount of the world's energy is coming from. And the reason why that's important, if you're an American and you care, is inflation, the economy, the global economy. Now, add to that, if Iran decides in this situation, maybe we should weaponize. Well, Iran can't weaponize, and then the rest of the Arab states that are in the region just decide, you know what, we don't care. Of course they do. Saudi Arabia has already said as such. So you could create a nuclear arms race in the region. All of this because we're allowing a genocidal state, a state that is committing genocide. This is when the media uses accused, it sends me into a fit of rage. I'm like, no one has said they're accused. They've concluded. The largest human rights organizations in the world, every important institution in the world has concluded in multiple reports. There are multiple UN Commission reports that says Israel's actions constitute genocide. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, genocide. So Israel is committing genocide. So to protect Israel's rights, I'm sorry, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because I'm
No, it's like, it's so insane. No, it's also just so insane. What else are you supposed to do? It's like a bad joke.
Unleashing, I mean, and I've heard people use this metaphor because it's accurate. Pandora's box. Like, you don't know what the consequences will be. Maybe they won't be that bad. I don't know. But there's so much potential bad consequence when there are very clear solutions. Very clear solutions. A state that is clearly open to negotiations to resolve this issue and prevent a war from happening. That is something that can be done right now. That option exists right now as we're having this conversation. Everything that is happening will be a choice made first by Israel and then by the United States. It is being done by choice. So if we do get into that scenario, they chose it.
So, right, I mean, that's being decided right now in the Situation Room, literally, with Trump's cabinet officials and advisors, including Tulsi Gabbard, who's an interesting character because, she was just a month ago, I think, testifying maybe to some Senate committee, saying that as director of national intelligence, she can attest that Iran is not trying to build a nuclear weapon. But here you have a month later, and she's in a cabinet meeting saying God knows what. Before we started recording, I was watching CNN because I've kind of just been watching the news on loop. And it was Christiana Amanpour. She was interviewing John Feiner, and John Feiner was the deputy national security advisor under he served as deputy national security advisor under Jake Sullivan in the Biden administration. So he served, overseeing the genocide in Gaza. And he's sitting there talking about, he was also a negotiator during the JCPOA. And he was sitting there just like talking about how this was an opportunity because Iran's partners in the region had been weakened, meaning Hamas and Hezbollah. And when they talk about a genocide like that's when they say Hamas has been weakened, they mean because Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza. When they talk about Hezbollah has been weakened, they mean because Israel committed war crime after war crime after war crime against civilians in Lebanon. And when they're talking about the potential for this escalation with Iran and taking out their nuclear sites and maybe changing the Iranian regime and making the world a better place, they're talking about destroying a country of 90 million people who have dreams, who have plans, who have families, who love and care about them. Like, the way with which this entire region and the people who live in it are just written off as though their lives do not matter at all. It makes me so angry. Like, I'm just walking around fuming, and I know you are too, but the level of racism that is required to be this dismissive of millions and tens of millions of people who live lives that matter in a region that matters, that is treated like a trash can or a playground, is so sick. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this. I saw this clip and it really infuriated me. And so I'm going to infuriate you and the rest of everybody else and show it to you. And it's talking about Iran's resources in the most human way imaginable. Like, these people are just algorithms with no feelings. So here it is.
What would be interesting is if there is regime change in Iran and you could get private companies operating in that country with the world's third largest oil reserves, gas reserves, third largest oil reserves. So there's a lot of oil there. And if Iran were to have regime change, peace and stability would be strengthened. So it's, but for the oil companies, though, these momentary spikes are dangerous.
Really interesting.
I think it's the same thing for OPEC countries as well.
Having listened to Bob McNally for a couple of minutes here, you're not terribly worried yet, but things could change very quickly. Is that a fair assessment?
You're right. I'm not terribly worried, but I'm more worried than we are today. Here we are in the markets.
Yeah, I'm sorry I did that to you. I'm really sorry, but it's just, this is literally how white men in suits, that's Bloomberg News, are just like, talk about the people of this region. We're just numbers and resources. That's it. So please feel free to respond to that.
I mean, it's colonial language. It's not, nothing has changed. I think the thing is you can believe, not me and you, because we obviously don't, but you can, person X, whoever it is, can believe that, if I don't do it, somebody else will. We're going to fight over this is the nature of human beings. We're going to fight over resources anyway, so we should be the ones on top. That can be your belief system. I disagree with it wildly, but there's a couple of problems. Number one is, if you have that belief system, you can't moralize it. That's not a moral belief system. That's anybody can do anything. The biggest problem with the way that these things are presented is it's presented as if we live in a system of rules, but those rules don't apply to us. And we can talk about a country's resources like so flippant. So just so you know, if there's regime change, there's a lot of chance for investment opportunities here. It'll bring stability, because that happened when? Like, it's just like, what are you talking about? What is the example of that happening that we're talking about it like regime change is this very simple, clean process and things usually work out great in the wake of it? But this has been the mentality and the colonial mentality of the West for centuries. So people think that in the past, when you talk about colonialism, when you think about, the genocide of the natives in this hemisphere, when you think about the Atlantic slave trade, when you think about these horrific parts of human history, you think they went in there and they just said, yeah, we're just going to kill all of you. No, they didn't. They used the kind of language that we're still hearing, because for most normal, non-sociopathic human beings, mass slaughter is a problem. Most people don't like it when you kill kids. They don't. That's why the narrative, and if you look at polls in the US and public opinion about Israel and Palestine, oh my God. I mean, and this is in a highly, highly propagandized, insulated place. And yet the narrative is shifted simply because Palestinian journalists, who are also being slaughtered in mass, are sharing what is happening on the ground, and image after image of child that has died. It doesn't mean that the men and women, the adults, don't matter. Of course they do. But there is a visceral, biological reaction that people have when they see children suffering and dying in this way. So you can't sell it by being like, they're just not people, so we're going to kill them. So you have to sell it in a different way. And this is how they sort of sell things. But they do so by dehumanizing those populations in such a way where you can talk about it like that. Oh, I'll give you one last really quick example, because I criticize the media a lot, and The Economist I sometimes criticize. I mean, The Economist is ridiculous, so what would you criticize about it? But there's a cover from The Economist from the Iran-Iraq War, right? That war in the 1980s that we've talked about at some point today. And there's a cover from when Saddam Hussein invades Iran. And I don't remember the exact phrase that it uses, so I'm paraphrasing it, but essentially it was like a map of the region, and what it said is, why is something so great like oil, like why is something so precious as oil doing in such a bad place? You know, like, why is our stuff that we want amongst these people?
Wow.
And that is still that as soon as I heard that clip, I immediately thought of that Economist cover where it's like, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to think about the potential fallout for what we're doing, but they do have a lot of oil and gas.
It's what it always goes back to. Sorry, I can't help but be with the updates, but the updates are important. So as this is the New York Times, as the possibility that the US could enter Israel's war against Iran looms ever larger, President Emmanuel Macron of France denounced the idea of using force to achieve regime change. He told reporters at the in Canada, where he was attending the G7 summit, does anyone think that what was done in Iraq in 2003 was a good idea? Does anyone think that what was done in Libya the previous decade was a good idea? No. I think the biggest mistake today is to use military means to bring about regime change in Iran, because that would mean chaos. I mean, thanks for saying it now, but you know, he basically blamed Iran for all this. I want to remind people, Israel started this, like literally started this. I don't know if you have anything you want to say to that at all. So
no, I mean, it's funny to hear. Yeah, I agree with you, Macron, that's the situation. But you're the guy who said after Iran was attacked, said that Israel has the right to defend itself. I don't know how an attack is self-defense, but you know, that's the argument that's being made. So, but that was the same argument, which is so ironic now that he's understanding exactly from the first day what the rest of us understood. This is a quote preemptive strike. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it's exactly what we did in 2003. So it's just so funny to see him. It's almost as if when they see the wheels coming off and the potential for the disaster, because it's all there, the potential. Listen, I'm going to say one quick thing, because I don't want it to sound like I'm making a prediction of that. This is what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. There is also the possibility at any given moment we can reel things back. That possibility always exists. These are just people. These are people making decisions, and those decision makers can make different decisions at any given point. Maybe Iran will decide not to escalate and respond, even if the US enters and attacks. Maybe they'll do more measured kind of responses, and everybody will, you know, sort of stop after a certain period, and it won't escalate to where it's going to escalate to. We don't know. But again, the ultimate point that I'm making is, if you look at the historical record, the precedent is quite bad. It's pretty much all negative across the board. And this particular situation, at this particular moment in global history, is much, much worse in its potential than what existed in 2003. It is not the same world. 2 decades later, we do not live in the same world. And if we allow, as a global community, whatever you want to call it, genocide to be normalized, nothing is left. Nothing is left.
You know, I'm glad you brought it to that, because I mean, you could say this war in Iran right now could not have happened without the Gaza genocide, because Israel has spent the last 20 months obviously killing probably what's going to come out to be hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza once we get the actual death toll, but also 20 months eroding really any pretense that existed of international law, and basically demolishing the idea that there are consequences for war crimes, for mass killing, even for genocide. And, you know, I'm not trying to be one of these people who's saying that there was ever some sort of utopian international law. There wasn't. It was always one-sided. There was always double standards.
But it was
different. It was different.
Yeah,
like what we're seeing now. Go ahead.
Because I agree with you. I agree with you. Like, I don't, there should be no illusion that like international law was working. It wasn't. You know, it was always selective. It was always used as a tool of imperialism. I mean, the entire setup of the UN and the Permanent Five is absurd itself, right? Like, that's, you can't have that system never be changed and think no system works that way. Like, time changes things, everything evolves. Those international institutions need to evolve as well. And it's clear that they cannot answer the problems of the day. But it's different because and this is why during the Biden admin, I was so critical of them. Because I was like, well, you're, you know, the Democrats, you're the liberal, we're not racist, we like everybody people. But no, you dehumanized Palestinians and allowed a genocide to happen. I mean, I would constantly say, I'm like, even if you don't have, if you're an American and you're thinking, well, that's over there and that's not about us, why should I care about what's going on? I mean, I think you should. I think we should always care if there's a genocide happening because they're human beings, especially when it's your weapons and your tax dollars that are doing it. We have a responsibility. But let's, for a moment, put that extremely important fact aside. There are consequences for us. Like, look at what's happening inside of the country. Look at what's happening to free speech. Like, you cannot just have, this is not sustainable to just have these extremely repressive systems, allow them to do anything that they want, and then assume you're going to have some facade or even of like law and order or things that protect ordinary people. And that's why it's different. It's things have shifted. But I think that puts us in a position where we have to look at how we have to change those systems to address the current problems. And the Biden admin just blazed the trail for all of this to happen.
No, exactly. And it's also the fact that Israel was able to get away with everything it did in Gaza. Once it's okay to bomb hospitals, like on the regular, that becomes okay everywhere. Like now it's just okay. It's now normal to just bomb hospitals. It's now normal to just kill journalists. I mean, the Israelis literally bombed a media outlet while it was reporting live yesterday. And that's not to say they wouldn't have done it had it not been for Gaza, but it literally didn't register because of Gaza, because Israel has murdered over 200 journalists on purpose in Gaza. Like, it's the normalization of this sort of barbarism is going to be the future of warfare. And I'll also add, something I noticed, and I know you noticed it too. How could you not? Is for the first time in recent memory, Israel is facing some consequences. And by that, I mean materially, right? Not symbolic ones, because missiles are actually hitting Tel Aviv and Israelis are like rushing to bomb shelters. And the world is watching that. And I gotta say, like, I open my social media feed and there's people celebrating that. And I get it. It's because they've watched Israel commit genocide for 20 months. Like, look, I don't want people to be bombed anywhere, but I absolutely get why people are getting satisfaction. And that's the world we live in now, where people are getting satisfaction watching people face consequences. I mean, here in Lebanon, sometimes you can see the Iranian missiles, especially if it's at night, you can see the Iranian missiles from certain places. I'm sure you saw videos of people in Lebanon posting from like weddings and stuff where they saw those missiles going overhead that made people really happy. I mean, people in Gaza cheering because they've been undergoing a genocide and a death camp by these people for, the last 20 months, and Israel has this Iron Dome to protect it. And now like they're facing some consequences. And I think what's really wild is to see Israelis demanding the world's sympathy, as if like they're the ultimate victims because they run to bomb shelters. And I'm not saying that's easy. That really sucks. It really sucks to have your daily routine disturbed and upended and potentially be subjected to violence from the sky. That really sucks. But guess what? The entire region is existing like that because of you. And it just blows my mind that they can't see that.
The rules are important for a reason. That's, I think this is the frustration of when you would criticize, why aren't you applying these rules? Like, why doesn't Iran have the right to defend itself? Well, we don't like the Iranian government. Okay, but it still has the right to, it still has a right. Like, this is the thing that I don't understand. Like, look, if you're in the United States, don't we have something called due process? Like, it doesn't really matter what somebody does. Like, we don't just execute people in the street, right? Well,
we're not supposed to, but who knows?
It does happen. But we're not supposed to, right? And when that happens and people see it and there's a video of it, it sparks protest in the US. Why? Because that's not supposed to happen, right? We're supposed to, even prisoners have rights. Like, everybody has rights. That's what we built. That's the whole, Western civilization, these people who talk about Western civilization while they're committing slaughter, but then don't actually care about the things that are supposed to be important in Western civilization, was this. Like, this was the whole point. You created rules, not to protect other people, to protect yourself. That's what the rules were created for. You created it because you realized, well, here's the logic. if I decide that these rules don't apply to those people and they don't have to be protected, then that means I'm not going to be protected. That's why we do it. So this has been the problem. It's like you've created a sort of lawlessness where now anything is allowed. But then as soon as someone uses the same, not even the same tactics, I'm very sorry, but just any tactics, any form of response to you, all of a sudden this is like everybody is like, I can't believe they did that. What have you been doing this? Where have you been this whole time? You cannot, I mean, that's just power. That's it. That's again, I mean, it goes back over and over again to this idea of imperialism. It's I can do whatever I want, you know, rules for thee and not for me. Like I can do whatever I want, but you can't do the same thing. Sure, you can do that when you're in a position of power, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Like I would love it if people would just take a glance at history. It is never sustainable. All empires have fallen, always. And in the US, 250 years, you think that's a long time? It's not. It's not. Again, I implore people, just scan a history book. They fall. So if you want a world in which we're not facing, as a species, existential threats, there have to be actual rules, and they cannot be any exceptions to those rules. But we have made Israel, and by we, I mean the international community led by the Western world, has made Israel the exception over and over and over again. And this is where we are now.
You know, I, as well as we start to wrap here, I kind of want to like take a big picture approach to some of this because when I look at what the Israelis, with the help of the Americans, are implementing, it's this strategy. It's really barbaric. It's this strategy of kind of like what Trump said earlier. It's like either unconditional surrender or we will crush you. Like that is what Israel has done to Gaza. And actually, even in Gaza, if people did surrender, Israel would kill them anyway, because, you know, I should mention they've been killing like 100 people a day who are lining up to get desperately needed aid because they're starving them. So there's no such thing as even surrender for Gaza because they want that land. In Lebanon, it's like unconditional surrender or we crush you. That's literally what they're saying to Iran now. It's just this like really cruel and barbaric era we're in, where the most powerful demand complete and total domination and control. And if you don't submit and be their slave, they will crush you. Like that's what it looks like. And it doesn't really look good for the future because these are the people who have all the weapons and all the power. And again, I want to take it back to Palestine because being able to do that to Palestine has normalized that. And I want to take it to like this really proves that until Palestine is free, actually no one is free because this doesn't stop at Iran. Why is Iran a target? Iran is a target not because it has, you know, a repressive regime and because like this happened to this or that activist or human right in Iran. The US doesn't give a shit about human rights. Look at their closest allies. It's because Iran has oil that it doesn't give away for free or resources it doesn't give away for free. And because Iran supports groups across the region, like them or not, they challenge US and Israeli hegemony. That's what it's about. It's like Israel wants a region where they dominate everything and there is nobody who can challenge them. And that's actually the US view on the world. That is the US view on the world. Look at how they treat Latin America, look at how they treat Africa, and look at their coming Cold War that will maybe turn into a hot war with countries like Russia and China. And it's a really scary prospect because that is a really dark world. A really dark world where like everybody, it's all about who has the biggest weapons and who's the strongest, and they just crush everybody else. And so I don't know where the way out of this is, but if this continues to escalate, that is the world we're going to be living in.
Well, there's, you know, when you talk about human rights are important. Of course they're important, but do any of these states care about human rights? Of course not. I mean, again, I hate to keep saying this, but just look at the state of Israel. Even before they were committing genocide, they've been occupying illegally Palestinian land for decades. Even before they were committing genocide, they were an apartheid state. Even before they were committing genocide, they were imprisoning and killing children. Even before they were committing genocide, they were demolishing homes and ethnically cleansing Palestinians from parts of their own territory. So would we support a Iran, Saudi-backed regime change operation in Israel to free the population that is under Israel's control for their human rights? No, nobody would. Nobody even entertains that kind of an idea. And so again, it's this constant hypocrisy and double standards. What I will say about what you were talking about is the silver lining is the wrong way of saying it. It's not a positive thing, so I don't know how to explain it. But what I'm trying to say is at least now they're being honest. Because back in, 2 decades ago, these were liberation movements. We were freeing people with our bombs. Now we're just crushing them. Now we're being honest. They're telling you what. Now they don't sugarcoat it. Nobody's talking about freeing Palestinians in Israel. They're talking about killing them openly, just like open genocidal incitement. Nobody in the US is talking about liberating Iranians. They're talking about crushing them, and they're talking about surrender. So the language has completely changed as well. And at the very least, it should help people to sort of wade through the layers of propaganda that they've been exposed to that has made a lot of the public sort of believe that kind of rhetoric that, there's liberators, or we believe in democracy and human rights. Like, none of that is true. None of it was true, but now it's just much, much, much more clear that it's not true, nor was it ever.
I mean, that's definitely for sure. I really listen. I want to thank you for joining me for all this time. And I just really quickly want to ask you, like, moving forward, I don't know, like we don't have crystal balls. We don't know what's going to happen, but are there kind of like any last thoughts you want to leave people with? Because like, you're somebody I imagine you're probably in touch with your family throughout the day. And that can't be easy because it's probably really chaotic and panicky. I mean, I saw you tweeting about your aunt, and she lives on the 17th floor, and like how she's supposed to evacuate. I mean, these are real life decisions people have to make when they live in a city that's under bombardment. And I mean, I don't know where people are supposed to go. And I just kind of want to bring it back to the human aspect of this. But what do you want to leave people with, Assal, as we're on the precipice of potentially a massive escalation here?
I'm sorry, you brought up my aunt, and it made me very emotional.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I cry about my own family, but I've been crying about Palestinians every day. So it's not that I think Iranian lives are somehow more important anyway than Palestinian or Lebanese or Syrian or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying, but it is very hard. I can't predict anything, nor will I try to, but what I will say is that we have an option. We have options. And if you have a platform, if you can protest, if you can talk to a senator or anybody, I mean, that's really the only power that we have. And I would implore people to do so, because the potential consequences are bad.
Well, I want to thank you for your voice. I want to thank you for all of the incredible work that you do. I want to remind people to follow you on Twitter. Your tweets are epic and just like blowing right through all the propaganda at Assal. And I want to thank you for joining me for almost an hour and a half here, talking about this very important issue. And I have a feeling we're going to be discussing it again. So thank you so much, Assal. And everybody, I want to remind you to make sure you smash the like button, make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News, make sure you hit the notification button, tap the bell so that you can get notifications whenever anything goes up. And we will be back with more content soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Rania.